Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, May 22nd. We're now progressing through the latter stages of the month of May, and in the Atlantic Basin, tropical season actually officially begins on June 1st. Of course, it can begin anytime it wants to, and we have talked about the possibility of a late May beginning to the Atlantic Basin tropical season due to some very warm sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico region, the southwestern Atlantic, and there actually is a tropical system right now in the southwestern part of the Atlantic Ocean. Unlikely that it becomes anything named, but it's something that the National Hurricane Center is now beginning to monitor. And we'll start off here by the latest look of the temperature anomalies around the globe. And El Nino is certainly showing signs of strengthening. It is quite intense right along the west coast of South America and evolving now out into the more central part of the equatorial region in the Pacific Ocean. It will, of course, be a main factor in the upcoming tropical season and may actually play a big role in the winter season to follow. We'll, of course, get more into that over the next few months. But here is the latest look at sea surface temperature anomalies. And again, west coast of South America shows some very warmer than normal water temperatures right here in this region. You can see it's kind of now expanding westward, as it were, right along the equatorial region. This is actually the equator right here, latitude of 0 degrees right here. So this is your El Nino that is really starting to strengthen here, and computer forecast models continue to have it strengthen over the next couple of months. We'll take a look at some of those computer forecast models now. Let's also take a look here at the Atlantic Ocean, and this is a very warm look to the Atlantic, the breeding grounds in the Atlantic Basin, right in this region right here, from the west coast of Africa out across to the Gulf of Mexico right here, southwestern part of the Atlantic. And these are kind of opposing forces in terms of tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin. El Nino typically is unfavorable for the development or intensification of tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin because it tends to be correlated with increased wind shear in the breeding ground region of the Atlantic Ocean. And so that is kind of a negative factor for tropical activity. But whenever you see sea surface temperatures above normal, especially off of Africa and into the Gulf of Mexico, that is a favorable factor for the development and intensification of tropical activities. So kind of opposing forces, which is ultimately why we ended up suggesting we may end up somewhere in the middle, like kind of a normal type of tropical season here. And you can take a look at the tropical outlook right at ArcfieldWeather.com. Again, officially gets underway on June 1st. Out in the Pacific Ocean, notice kind of a cool ring out in the Pacific Ocean surrounding warmer than normal conditions, and very likely going to be quite an active season this year, especially in the western part of the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean has been quieter than normal over the past 3 years, and it may just try to make up for some of that lost ground this season, again, especially in the western part of the Pacific Ocean. Well, I mentioned the computer forecast models in general continue to forecast a strengthening El Nino over the next few months. This is a kind of a compilation of all kinds of models from around the world and all kinds of models in terms of dynamical models or statistical models. The statistical models rely on statistics. Dynamical have some current conditions involved. And you can see right here, the compilation of the dynamic models are shown in red, and anything above this line right here, this neutral line right here, is considered El Nino conditions. This is El Nino up here, La Nina down here, and certainly the average of the dynamical models are above that neutral line here, and the statistical models right here shown in green are certainly weaker, but nonetheless on the El Nino side of things over the upcoming summer season and then into the fall. This is the rolling 3-month average time period right here. This is June, July, and August. So in general, there's agreement here amongst the models for an El Nino. Some have kind of a weak El Nino, some have a stronger El Nino. We'll see how that evolves here. Tends to peak out later on in the fall. This is September, October, November, December time frame right in here. And this is all the way out into the winter season. There's still some signs of El Nino heading into the upcoming winter season. We'll see how things evolve over the next several months. But El Nino is on the way, and it will have an impact on the Atlantic Basin tropical season. Well, let's take a look at the weather conditions across the nation over the next several days. And again, we have that tropical system, kind of a disturbance, a tropical disturbance over the southwestern part of the Atlantic Ocean. That's not the only thing we'll have to monitor over the next several days. There'll be a system developing near the eastern seaboard, the southeastern coastline, and then perhaps moving up the coast later this week going into the Memorial Day weekend. Whether or not that becomes a tropical system remains to be seen, but it could have an impact on the Mid-Atlantic region, for example, during the upcoming holiday weekend. This is the 10-day forecast map of total precipitation by last night's 0-Z run of the 0-6Z run of the GFS, and you see a lot of the activity right here over the southwestern part of the Atlantic Ocean. Again, there's a system right now in this region right here, which actually is of tropical origin, being monitored by the National Hurricane Center. And then later in the week, there'll be another system trying to form along the eastern seaboard and could ride up the East Coast by the time we get to the latter part of this week and into the upcoming Memorial Day weekend. Dry out in the southwestern states here, not too atypical for this time of the year. And a decent amount of precipitation across the interior northwestern part of the nation and across the plains over the next 10 days or so. Well, now let's take a look here at the 500 millibar height anomaly forecast maps from the operational run of the GFS last night. This is as we begin the new work week here on Monday morning, May 22nd. Notice a lot of blue up over the higher latitudes. It's colder than normal conditions over much of the Arctic as we begin the new work week here. A ridge south of Alaska. Now let's move forward here, and we pointed out last week that this time of the year, I certainly like to monitor closely whether there's a strong ridging that pops up over the southeastern part of Canada, because that tends to allow for the development of tropical systems, southwestern Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, kind of undercutting that ridge. And we'll see that we indeed get that kind of a scenario in several days here. This is the forecast map for Thursday of this week. And again, we talked about possibility of a low pressure trying to form over the southeastern coastline later in this week. At the same time, ridging starts to really intensify over south central Canada. And by the time we get to the beginning of the Memorial Day weekend, here we have an upper level low by the time we get to Saturday morning sitting right here over the southeastern U.S. At the same time, that high pressure ridging that we've been warning about sets up over the southeastern part of Canada. Again, this often allows for the tropical systems to move from east to west right across the Bahamas, the southwestern Atlantic, perhaps even in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, remember, warmer than normal sea surface temperatures right in this region right here. So you have that high intensifying over southeastern Canada. This is kind of a setup for tropical activity. Of course, it's very early in the game here for the tropical season. So if there is a low pressure area that does indeed form along the southeastern coastline, doesn't guarantee that it becomes a named tropical system, but this raises a red flag. Let's move forward in time here and go beyond this time period. You can see all the way into Sunday and into Memorial Day itself. A week from right now, we have this upper level low, which, by the way, can end up producing some unsettled weather conditions this weekend over the Mid-Atlantic region, over the Carolinas, and all the way down over the southeastern U.S. At the same time, warm, dry conditions across much of Canada with that upper level ridging sitting over central and eastern part of Canada. Well, how does all this translate to the temperatures in the lower part of the atmosphere? We're looking at 850 millibar temperature anomalies as we begin the day here on Monday. Colder than normal conditions right now over eastern Canada, and again over much of the Arctic region is colder than normal over Greenland and over the high latitudes in general as we begin the work week. Well, as this low pressure area tries to form along the eastern seaboard later in the week, it'll result in a lot of clouds over the southeastern U.S., and the result of that will be cooler than normal temperatures. And here we have another cold shot coming over, probably a frontal passage in the I-95 corridor region, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, Wednesday evening, sometime Wednesday night, and that'll usher in some cooler air for Thursday and Friday. It still remains dry, looks pretty dry Monday through Friday in this part of the U.S., the Mid-Atlantic region. But cooler again Thursday and Friday right here. A chilly air mass for this time of the year moves in for Thursday and Friday and stays cooler than normal all across the deep south here. Again, it's possible development of low pressure across the eastern seaboard here. Here we go into the beginning stages of the Memorial Day weekend. This is Friday, and cool for the eastern half of the nation, warm out across western part of Canada, and much of Canada itself would be turning warmer than normal with that upper level ridge really intensifying over Canada. And here we go into Saturday and finally into Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, cooler than normal across much of the southern and eastern part of the U.S., warmer than normal over Canada. Well, let's wrap up with the surface forecast maps from the zero-Z run of the GFS as we begin the day here on Monday, May 22nd. Here is that low pressure area over the southwestern Atlantic. If you take a look at NOAA's National Hurricane Center, a map right now, they'll have an X right here. They're monitoring this, a tropical system. Unlikely that it strengthens into any kind of a named system, but pretty much the first, well, there was something that they renamed as a tropical system in January, but one of the first tropical systems right here as we begin the day here. Notice high pressure over Canada, and that is still maintaining some cooler than normal air as we begin the day here on Monday. Now, let's move forward here in time, and we'll see along this part of the eastern U.S., another low pressure area gets its act together later in the week. Here's that first system right now. By the time we get to the middle of the week, this is the Wednesday morning forecast map. Here's that first system. Again, will be monitored by NOAA's National Hurricane Center over the next couple of days. Then we move forward here into the latter part of the week. That pushes off and weakens over the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Then by the time we get to Friday, we see another low pressure area. And again, remember the sea surface water temperatures, the water temperatures right here above normal. This part of the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico region. And here's that high pressure. Another Canadian high follows a cold frontal passage Wednesday night, a time frame for cooler than normal air on Thursday and Friday into the mid-Atlantic, northeast U.S. And then we have to watch this system here. There will be an upper level low supporting this surface low pressure area by the time we get to Saturday morning. It certainly can result in an unsettled and cool Memorial Day weekend over the Carolinas, maybe even into the mid-Atlantic region. Certainly when you see this kind of a flow here with kind of an easterly flow here setting up on the north side of low pressure to the south and on the south side of high pressure to the north, that spells potential cool and unsettled weekend in the mid-Atlantic coastal areas of New Jersey, Delmarva Peninsula. We'll see how that evolves over the next several days, but this is the forecast map for Saturday morning. Let's clear the deck here and go out a little farther in time. GFS model has that kind of weakening as it moves up. This is all the way into Sunday, and then finally into Monday, a week from right now. Kind of unsettled, kind of on the cool side. Mid-Atlantic down to the Carolinas, even the southeast U.S. For the Memorial Day weekend. At least that's on the table here. So a couple different systems to monitor near the East Coast. One right now, a weak tropical wave. Have to monitor that over the next couple of days. And then late this week into the upcoming week, and there could be something developing near the southeastern U.S. coastline that could push up into the mid-Atlantic region sometime during the holiday weekend. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Orion.